Is back. It's week 2. Trey Lance, Sam Darnold splitting first team reps, some offensive line talk, and John Lynch going on the radio saying some things about the quarterbacks as well. Me and Suneil got you covered all after this.
Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on 3. 1, 2, 3, dominate.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the program. We got some 49ers news. OTAs is back, and to start that off, Trey Lance, Sam Darnold splitting reps. I talked about some of the offensive line stuff. Offensive line coach Chris Forster talked today. We're going to get into all of that very soon. But first, Suneil, how you doing, my man?
Man, everything is beautiful. It's a little bit overcast here in the down south in Southern California, but other than that, my smile is bright enough to light the sky up.
Exactly, man. I mean, it's a nice Wednesday today, and 49ers talk is back. I mean, at every single week we're gonna get something or another out of OTAs. OTAs week number 2 now. Media was there today, and there's a lot of takeaways to start. Got to start though with the most important one: Sam Darnold, Trey Lance. Kyle Shanahan alluded to it last week. Was going to split reps after Trey Lance took all the 1 reps last week. Seemed like a fairly even split, 50-50 today. Any takeaways that you have from the 50-50 split, especially with how, now quarterback, it's kind of fizzling out. We're getting more and more into everybody's kind of coming back into, the realm of things, more understanding the offense for Darnold and all. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think it was just funny, the timing, because, the last few days there was this report coming out that Trey Lance was taking all the number 1 team reps at quarterback. And obviously this was done with the reporter who wasn't there because no media access was allowed. And then when the media access was there, all of a sudden Sam Darnold starts getting some team 1 reps. So I don't know if this was a little kind of shade thrown by Kyle Shanahan again for the media getting involved in his practices, or creating narratives that he doesn't want created or whatnot. So he just kind of did the big FU to the media and was like, "Oh, you're reporting that Trey Lance is taking all the number 1 reps. Well, let's make Sam Darnold QB1 for this practice." So I thought that was interesting. As far as does that mean anything? To me, not really. I mean, I think we have to take Shanahan at his word, and he's mentioned this is a competition. He's not anointing Trey Lance or Sam Darnold, no matter how much the fan base wants him to. He wants the best man to win, and like we mentioned last week, Rohan, like, both of these quarterbacks seem to be mentally locked in and understanding what their roles are and what they need to do. At this point, both of them feel confident that they could get the number 1 job. And I think that's the way you got to go in. I think it's going to do what's best for the team. It's going to make both of these players better. So no, I'm not reading too much into OTAs. I'm really just focused on making sure that everybody gets out of it healthy, and onto the actual training camp,
When real action starts in training camp, pretty much. But I mean, I think what you
exactly.
say is pretty on point. It's kind of funny though, right? Earlier this morning, we hear from ESPN's Jeff Darlington. For those of you guys that recognize the name, Jeff Darlington is the one who also broke the Deebo Samuel trade request news last year when Samuel told him about the trade request. He essentially says Lance is getting all the 1 reps. Darnold has been, he's been getting all the backup reps, backup duty as he kind of gets his playbook under his belt. For now, Trey Lance getting his opportunity with those first team reps. Obviously flips today, and it's not a surprise necessarily. Kyle Shanahan said we'll make sure to even those out last week after Lance got all the 1 reps. And it makes sense in the timeline as Darnold was, getting the playbook under his belt. Really not much action with the 49ers. And so you get that first week down. Now you start to even it out. Seems, I mean, statistically, it's tough, right? Without context, without really seeing how everything went. But Darnold had 13 passes today, completed 10. Lance, 12 passes, completed 6. Unfortunately, it seemed like a lot of drops were there. 5 total, 3 for Lance, 2 for Darnold. But seems like, this quarterback competition in a way is getting underway, and it's got a good 50-50 split at the moment.
I gotta say, I don't know when this started and who started it as far as started to list the stats from uh, as far as the throws and completion percentages and all that kind of stuff. I think it's so dumb, Rohan. Like, completion percentage in a voluntary OTAs to me is the dumbest thing to actually like go out there and mention. It's all done for clickbait. People kind of run with their narratives, right? Obviously, 6 for 12 by Trey Lance. Nobody is seeing any of the throws or anything like that. You're just looking at the stat sheet. Even if you see, 3 drops, I don't think that means anything. We have no idea what those throws were. I personally think that this is the time to be able to work things out, right? You're playing, you're throwing to probably receivers that you're not too familiar with. You're practicing routes that maybe are newer to the playbook or whatnot. It could be a plethora of reasons why the numbers are the way that they are, but I just think it's so dumb to list these numbers. I guess it's not dumb. People are doing it for the reasons that they're doing it, but it's just so funny right now. Like the people that are anti Trey Lance are taking that 6 for 12, and it's proving all of their points that Trey Lance isn't ready and prepared to be a week 1 starter or a starter in the NFL type of thing. And I'm just like, yo, relax. Jimmy Garoppolo, most people who tend to dislike Trey Lance are big fans of Jimmy Garoppolo. And I remember in OTAs a couple years ago, Jimmy Garoppolo was throwing 4 or 5 picks per day. So I don't read too much into the numbers come OTAs.
Yeah, I mean, again, it is, again, right? Like it's statistics in OTAs. A lot of things. You don't have your entire team out. I don't think Trent Williams is there right now. Deebo Samuel didn't play in the scrimmage portion, although he was present for the first time this year. A lot of different things go into it. So again, it's you got to take it all with a grain of salt. But overall, with the 49ers and this quarterback rep split in a way, seems like right now, you know, I'll lead into another topic because John Lynch had a lot of comments today on the quarterback topic. He talked specifically about Brock Purdy, but an intriguing part that he said, 2 things. One, clarified Kyle Shanahan's comments. We're not going to rush Brock Purdy out until he's fully healthy. And 2, it's an open competition at quarterback. Did any of that surprise you at all that he came out and said that?
It surprises me only in the sense that it seems like John Lynch is finally coming back to reality, because I think that initially, not necessarily if verbatim from what he's saying, but the tone of which he was speaking was Brock Purdy is QB1, and everybody else kind of falls in line from there type of situation. And I think that there was this sentiment that there's a real possibility Brock Purdy is going to be ready for week 1, and that mostly I think was coming from John Lynch, untempered. When Kyle Shanahan spoke about the availability of Brock Purdy, he said the same sentiment. Brock Purdy could be ready for day 1, or from week 1. However, just because he's cleared to play week 1, if he isn't ready and practicing, a couple weeks before, that's the only way he would be prepared to play week 1. I think that John Lynch is a little bit more kind of pushing for Brock Purdy to be the guy. And obviously I think it's clear most people that are reading the tea leaves and kind of reading the body language and reading between the lines, it's clear that John Lynch, I think, is more of a Brock Purdy guy than a Trey Lance guy. And it seems like Kyle Shanahan really just wants it to be the best quarterback and does still believe that Trey Lance could be that guy and is giving him ample opportunity. So it just was surprising that finally it seemed like John Lynch was at least being open to that idea that there could be another quarterback and that starts, and that for me is going to be Trey Lance week 1.
Right. And I mean, I think initially, right, when you hear Lynch and Shanahan, I mean, in general, Lynch is more of the optimist. Shanahan seems like more of a pessimist. And I mean, overall, Lynch obviously, he's saying what you want to hear initially about Brock Purdy. The hope is he's ready for week 1, hope is he's ready for training camp. While in reality, that might not come true, understanding that you want him to be in practice before he plays, and he might only come back healthy at the early portion of September after training camp and after preseason, which means he might need some weeks of acclimation and practice before being out there on the game on the field. And so I think that that reality is sort of starting to set in now that we have a little more of a clearer timeline. And this ties into something that saw earlier this week. Ian Rappaport is he's a guy who's also pushed the Purdy narrative significantly this offseason. And I'm not saying there's anything necessarily wrong with it, but what Rapport said, I kind of connected, you're connecting the dots. He said that right now, this is what the 49ers, as good as they could have hoped for. But he also pointed out, seems like the earliest Purdy will come back is early September. Early September matched with the fact that John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan have both said that you need practice time makes it somewhat more clear that at least at the moment that he won't be ready for week 1. The hope is he's ready for training camp, but if he's back in early September, he's got to be back in late July, which is a whole month of timeline that's different for him to be ready for training camp. And so that's where where you're talking about the hope, but the hope is it just doesn't seem like the reality right now. However, it seems Purdy wants to play, especially with the open competition, solidify his role, and it seems like he's ahead of schedule, which is good. Now, by ahead of schedule, it's ahead of schedule by 3 days, but still, he's ahead of schedule and he's hitting the benchmarks like the 49ers have said. Obviously, I'm still going to err on the side of caution until you see him in action in practice or in whatever setting. But it's at least the good thing is it's a positive sign right now in regards to Purdy.
Yeah, and I have a question for you, Rohan. I asked this to Jesse last night as well. So obviously the 49ers offense took a big leap when Brock Purdy was behind center. The offense was already looking pretty good, ever since the McCaffrey trade and he was fully integrated into the offense. Even with Jimmy G there, Jimmy G was playing his best football of his career, and the 49ers scoring at a pretty good, mark. And then when he came in, he took it to another level as far as the offense looking even that much better. My question to you is, all indications is that Trey Lance is probably going to be the week 1 starter just because obviously Brock Purdy isn't going to be ready for that. Let's say that, I guess my question to you is, what does Trey Lance have to do? What does this offense have to look like for him to solidify himself as QB1, where Kyle Shanahan isn't going to necessarily look to insert Brock Purdy in there? Do you think it's just a matter of wins, or does the offense have to look explosive as it was with Brock Purdy? And I guess my follow-up question would be, let's say the offense is looking the same. They're putting up 30 plus points per game like they were with Brock Purdy. Is that enough? Like, I guess, how does Trey Lance separate himself from Brock Purdy to where Kyle Shanahan is like, this is the quarterback we need to move forward with that's going to give us the best chance to win this season?
This is a tough question. I mean, this benchmark that we're trying to set essentially to see how does Lance unseat Purdy, how does Darnold even unseat Purdy. It's a tough one because there's really no quantifiable, quantifiable term or statistic that we can use that we can just clearly point at and say this is what you need. Here's what I believe though. For Lance to unseat Purdy, he has to first of all show a good comfortability in the offense, in operating the offense, because Lance was drafted, right, for his potential, for his ability not only to operate the offense, but also be utilized in the run game and operate outside of the scheme, outside of the playbook, be able to extend plays. However, what's the number one priority? Operating the offense at a high level, efficiently being able to operate that offense. Lance right now, that's the area where I think he needs biggest improvement on because it comes out with accuracy, right? I'm not gonna lie when I say he had accuracy concerns in training camp last year. I mean, that was there, and I mean that's the one issue that has been out there about Lance throughout his career. Now, obviously, when it comes to that, he didn't have a chance to prove himself last year, and in year one,
Yeah.
he was hampered by a finger injury, so the development was stunted there. To me, what I believe is I honestly don't think it matters about the record that the 49ers have. What was Brock Purdy able to do? Efficiently operate the offense and also score points. I think that those are the two biggest factors. If Lance can prove that he can efficiently operate the offense and score points, I think that that'll be enough to unseat Purdy, understanding that he's got a good grasp of being able to efficiently operate the offense, but to him there's more because of the skill set that he provides where he can do more. It's just we want to see this first. And so to me, that's where it's got to be because when Lance has been on the field, the 49ers have struggled to score points. And I'm not saying they need to score over 30 points a game. I do think that the identity of the 49ers offense changes because you're going to be able to utilize the run game more and then set up the pass in that way, understanding that Lance makes it 11 on 11 football, even if he isn't running the football at a high level. I mean, like not at a high level, but at a high volume. And so I do think that there's going to be a difference in identity, but the number one thing is how does he operate Kyle Shanahan's offense the way Shanahan wants it to be run?
Yeah, I think I'd have to push back a little bit. I think that if in the first 4 games of the season, the 49ers are 1-3 or 2-2, regardless of how good Trey Lance is looking, I think it's going to be tough not to make that QB switch just because the players on the team are gonna are gonna maybe put some pressure on um, wanting Purdy there since they've had so much success last year with Purdy. I think Trey Lance has to really show out. I think this team has to be 3-1, 4-0. They do have to be scoring 28, 29, 30 plus points per game. And the offense has to be one of the primary reasons that this team is winning. I think those are things that this team needs to see because when you look at what was going on with Brock Purdy, that kind of is the first time we really saw where the defense didn't have to carry the offense. They actually were able to, the defense was able to be even more dominant because they were playing with the lead, which is not something that they're used to doing, especially in first halves of games and things of that nature. So I don't I think that it's good. I think that it's going to take more than just the team winning, more than just Trey Lance feels looking comfortable in the backfield. I think that he has to show that it's not just potential that he's the starting quarterback, like it has to come to fruition because we saw it come to fruition with Brock Purdy. So my question is how much does it need to come to fruition? Because this offense looked really good with Brock Purdy behind there. Now, obviously, 8 game sample size, not a lot of sample size. Teams weren't, probably weren't, didn't have a lot of tape on Brock Purdy to, create defenses against where his weaknesses are and things of that nature. However, for me, it's interesting what Kyle Shanahan is going to be looking towards as far as sticking with that, right? Even if they're 4-0, but the defense is winning most of those games, do they still stick with Trey Lance or do they put Brock Purdy in there? That's what I'm going to be interested in seeing.
All right. And I like that point. And let me clarify when I talk about winning. For me, I'm not saying that winning isn't necessary. I actually agree with you. To me, instead, what I'm saying is for me, I don't think that winning is going to be the biggest reason. And that if the 49ers are 3-1, but Lance is, he's up and down with his play, I still think the 49ers would execute a change. I think winning is needed, but I also think the primary thing when you talk about Brock Purdy and evaluating whether he comes back in is Lance's play. And how does he elevate the offense? How does he kind of change, or not change, but how does he add to what the 49ers already have with their skill position groups, with their offense? And so I think that that's a good question. Will I put maybe a number on it? Not necessarily in terms of the amount of points, but instead, like, the reason that I'm not trying to put a number on the points is because I think the 49ers are going to go back to their ways of old in managing the time of possession. Because with longer drives, because you're going to run the football a little more, not necessarily with the quarterback, but overall, I do think the 49ers will have longer drives, which means you have less opportunities to score points, but a greater balance and a greater dominance of the game in time of possession. However, I do think that they're going to place a bigger emphasis now on the passing game, understanding the value that a guy like Christian McCaffrey provides to your offense. Whereas in the past, with your running game, with guys like Raheem Mostert and other elite or running backs that worked very well in the scheme, it was more of a run-centric offense. So I do think Lance, it's going to be very important for him to score, like I said, but I do also think it's going to be evaluative of his play. It's really, how does Lance play? And I think that because if Lance plays well, I believe the 49ers win. If he doesn't play well, you can still win, but I don't know if the confidence is there to stick him in when you have a guy like Purdy, let's just say, who's been practicing for 4 weeks to be implemented there when he's fully ready.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's going to be interesting how well Trey Lance has to play for Kyle Shanahan to be like, this is the guy. Because, it's a good problem for Kyle Shanahan to have two quarterbacks that he feels like the team could win with, maybe even three if, Sam Darnold turns around as well. But at the end of the day, he has to decide who he feels like he could win the most with, right? And what does he need to see from Trey Lance? Because it seems like Brock Purdy has already proved that to him. What does Trey Lance have to do to, I guess, unseat Brock Purdy in Shanahan's mind? That's going to be, I think, the most interesting question this season.
Oh yeah, yeah, I definitely think that for sure. Got an interesting part here. Harold talks about the video Kurt Warner put out, um, essentially sparked by Ryan Hensley, a very good 49ers content creator. It's about Brock Purdy and his style of play. Some have called him a dink and dunk quarterback. And Kurt Warner essentially goes past that. Harold points out an area of Purdy's improvement is throwing the ball on time or sooner during certain routes. And I think that this is an important area because Purdy, he's a guy who has a good understanding of his game. If he believes that if he doesn't get that ball out on time, he won't throw it, understanding that it's got a good chance of the defense making a play on it because of the zip that he has on the ball. Dude, this is something you'll see a couple of times in throws between the second and third levels on curl routes, on different types of routes where receivers sit between those levels and Purdy's supposed to fire it in. He hesitates initially and then doesn't make that throw because obviously you don't want that pass to get intercepted or broken up on the way there. I think this is definitely an area of an improvement. I want to ask you though, what is your take on the dink and dunk type of quarterback, or maybe your definition on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was a little bit overblown in the sense that I feel like um, the definition of dink and dunk is different from whenever people were making their videos. Like what Ryan Hensley and Rich Madrid were talking about was different from what I think Larry Krueger and Kurt Warner were talking about as far as the definition of dink and dunk, right? I think that, and I don't necessarily look at dink and dunk as a negative. I think at the end of the day, as a quarterback, you're supposed to take whatever the defense is giving you. And especially when you have the type of weapons that the 49ers have, which have been called the Yak Bros for years now. And the iterations of Yak Bros have changed, with who is there at receiver. Sometimes getting the ball on time quickly to a guy like Debo Samuels can turn into a 50, 60-yard touchdown. You don't necessarily need to throw the ball 40 yards, 50 yards down the field to get that 60-yard touchdown. You could just throw an out to Ayuk at on time at the right, it put him in the right situation, and Ayuk could take it to the house 50, 60 yards. So it doesn't necessarily mean that dink and dunk doesn't mean you can still be explosive. But from what my understanding of what Ryan Hensley is saying is that Brock Purdy, because one of his limitations is his arm strength, his willingness to throw the ball deep and open up that next level of the defense and kind of blow the top off of them is more difficult. Even though he throws the ball down the field, it's not necessarily as accurate, and it's not something that he's going to do often. Whereas with Lance, and once again, it's potential. It's not about what we've actually seen, but with Trey Lance, we know that his arm strength is there to where he'd be willing to throw that ball, or he'd be capable of throwing that ball down the field a lot further. Whether or not it's accurate, still to be seen. But I think that's where the difference with the dink and dunk is. Whereas Brock Purdy's most success is going to be more short to mid-range throws, whereas Trey Lance has the potential to be a downfield thrower. And reality is that to win a Super Bowl, the last however many Super Bowls have been won, I think it's like the last 3 or 4 Super Bowl winners, that down the field thrower ends up being the one that wins the Super Bowl, right? Whether it's Patrick Mahomes, whether it's Matthew Stafford, Tom Brady. These are all guys that, do throw the ball down the field and have the ability to score based off of air yards. And, that isn't something that's been a 49er trait with the quarterbacks that they've had over the Shanahan tenure.
No, I think that you break it down well, right? There are different definitions. I agree with what Ryan Hensley said, but I also agree with parts of what Kurt Warner said. It's just they're utilizing different definitions for dig and dunk. Ryan Hensley's talking about Purdy. It's not the inability to make downfield throws or to throw the ball downfield. It's the inability, or it's really the arm strength that's an issue that limits the amount of throws that you can make, which obviously not hurts, but minimizes the impact in system that he can make with reads that are supposed to be there. And you see it on film. I've broken down the film for every game that Purdy played, where when you talk about Brock Purdy, it's not necessarily, I don't know if I'd say dink and dunk necessarily. And I don't think dink and dunk is necessarily a bad thing either, because there are quarterbacks that obviously can operate within system and be very efficient and be top 10 quarterbacks for sure. But to me, I've seen on film where you have throws that Purdy elects not to make because even if it's like I said, between the second and third levels, there are several of those. Some downfield shots where he chooses to throw it within a shorter range, or there's certain areas of improvement. Does that say that Purdy can't get better, like 49ers throwback here is saying? No. I think Purdy can certainly get better. The only thing is you question how much more arm strength he can build, especially coming off this injury. That's the thing. Kurt Warner had a great video. I didn't watch the entirety of it, but the points that he's making is correct. I mean, there are certain things that Purdy does very well, which is why the 49ers saw success in the range that he has success. Are there certainly improvements that he needs to be made? Sure. I agree. That's why I'm not necessarily sold on Purdy after 8 games. I do want to see the improvements come into place, but I think that there are 2 separate definitions that were being used, and I do think that I think there's certainly room for improvement, but I also think there's certainly room for caution, and that's where the whole part of potential comes into play. But the one thing I'll say, being able to throw the ball downfield doesn't matter unless you can do it consistently and accurately. That's what I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
And so for both quarterbacks, we saw Purdy able to throw down the field accurately. It's just he wasn't able to necessarily do it as consistently, understanding the limitations with his arm strength. With Lance, we haven't seen either yet just because of the amount of time that he's played. The hope is that he can deliver consistently and accurately down the field because that's what you drafted him to do. But that has to still be shown. And so I think it's still more valuable if you're able to do it accurately but not as consistently than have the ability to do it but not be able to do it accurately or consistently. That's how I'll say it.
Yeah, and I think that one aspect of Shanahan's offensive scheme that people haven't seen is that level. So if you're looking at
Right.
Kyle Shanahan's schemes, he usually has like three levels of where the receivers or the are making their running their routes. Right, he has an underneath route, a mid and a mid route, and then a deep route, and that's pretty much on every single scheme that he has as far as a passing play. And obviously Jimmy Garoppolo has been the quarterback under Shanahan's tenure for the longest time, and he was somebody who was hesitant or just chose not to really throw the ball to that third level. And as recent, that was Brandon Ayuk, right? Brandon Ayuk, struggled a lot with Jimmy as far as getting his numbers and things like that because he was always running that deeper route, and Jimmy wouldn't, pull the trigger on that as often. That's an aspect of Shanahan's offense that's just kind of forgotten because it's not seen. And I think one of the reasons why Shanahan was so adamant on bringing in a guy like Trey Lance, not only his athletic ability, but because of that arm strength, I think he saw it as an ability to open up the scheme. And it's not necessarily changing the plays, it's not necessarily drawing up different routes. It's the same plays, but just making a different decision because you have the athletic ability to make that throw type of thing. So I think ultimately that's what I guess the people that are pushing for Trey Lance to be the guy see that potential in Trey Lance to really open up that aspect of Shanahan's office. But once again, I'm a big Trey Lance fan, but I'm not going to sit here and say that it's because of what we've seen consistently, right? Just like you, we want to see it consistently. We're basing it off of potential. And this is Trey Lance's last chance with the 49ers to say, is it just potential? Or are you actually going to be able to execute? Because we've seen Brock Purdy maybe not execute at the level of potential that we think Trey Lance could be at. However, he's executing at a very high level to where this 49ers still be extremely competitive and make a deep run into the playoffs as we've seen. So that's what we have to see. Can Trey Lance put this potential that a lot of his supporters see in him? Is he going to finally put it into action? Because if he doesn't, you know, we would rather take the guy in Purdy that may not have the higher ceiling, but his floor is so much higher than if Trey Lance isn't executing at a high level.
And that's what this entire offseason is about, right? Can he get to that point where he's executing at a high level? Because if he isn't, then your quarterback situation is figured out, and that's why some high level media members, be it Ian Rappaport, be it whoever, even Matt Mayoko, who's talked about Sam Darnold being one of the most talented throwers of football that he's seen. Overall, it's how does he reach that? How does he reach that area? How does he get to that point where he himself, is executing at a high level? That's the biggest question for this offseason. But let's shy away from the quarterback talk because there was a lot more that came out. I don't know if it was as picked up, but a lot more that came out. Let's start with the offensive line. Chris Forster, offensive line coach, talked today to the media, and he gave out some very meaningful kind of points, starting with the starters. Colton McKivitz. The biggest question on that starting offensive line after obviously being groomed to start the last few years, McGlinchey leaves. 49ers don't sign anybody meaningful in free agency, don't draft anybody at the tackle position at all during the draft, despite it being an area of where they could have used depth. Showcases some confidence in Colt McKivitz. Essentially says it's McKivitz's job today, and it's kind of giving a vote of confidence in him, further solidifying that right side of the offensive line on who is going to be playing. What do you take away from the vote of confidence in McKivitz? Does it go along with what the 49ers are saying? And also, what could it mean for the plans later in the offseason with the money they have?
So I don't know if I told you, Rohan, but I was on a cruise. I was on a cruise about a month ago, I guess it has
Yeah.
been, and I met an NFL player there that um, played. Actually, was very familiar with Colt McKivitz. Worked out with him, and um, worked, and they had like a connection between the two of them. And I asked them straight out because I understood that he was going to be our right tackle. I was like, "What's your read on McKivitz? Do you think he could be a full-time starter in the NFL?" He's like, "Dude, you guys are good with Colin McKivitz. He's super locked in. He expects to be the starter, and you guys will be fine with him at right tackle." And I was like, "All right, cool." Um, I think people underestimate what the 49ers can do as far as development with their draft picks, right? We saw what Aaron Banks was able to accomplish in just the second year with the 49ers. He looks like a bona fide left guard for the foreseeable future for the 49ers. Burford, as a rookie, you saw his strides that he took from the beginning of the year to later on in the year as well. McKivitz was a fifth round draft pick by the 49ers in 2020. And even though he was often on the roster because of all of the COVID type stuff and he was just kind of a casualty of just uncertain times at that point with the salary cap being so low. He's been on this team developing for quite a few years, you know what I mean? So the fact that he's at right tackle, I think that's always been the plan. Obviously, by the decisions that they made this offseason, they saw him as the plan. By the way they drafted this year, they saw him as the plan. And it's always been out of Kyle Shanahan's mouth that Colin McKivitz was the right tackle there. So Chris Forrester saying that and giving that vote of confidence, I think is on point with what we've been hearing throughout this offseason. Now, I think it's great, right? One of the, I guess, biggest question marks last offseason when we were doing all of this offseason talk was the offensive line is going to be terrible. There's three guys that are starting that have very little experience. We don't know if they're going to be good. And it was like, some of the content creators, Rohan, were calling for the jobs of Lynch and Shanahan for not doing enough on the offensive line. And it was like a travesty, and they're not going all in, and all this talk was being said because of this offensive line. Well, they ended up being pretty darn good, right? They were a top 10 offensive line. Aaron Banks ended up being way better than anybody thought he was going to be. Brendel ended up being, a Pro Bowler, and Burford and it was like a combination of Burford and Brunskill. Played decent enough, right? So this ended up being a top 10 offensive line, and 80% of that offensive line is coming back. So continuity is there. Colin McKivitz, once again, is a homegrown talent. He drafted by the team, has been practicing with these guys for a few years. So I don't think that there's going to be that much of a change, or that it's not going to be hard to assimilate him to this offensive line. So I expect this offensive line not only to be just as good as they were last year, Rohan, I think they're going to take a step forward because all of these guys aren't fighting for their job anymore. Now they could just focus on like becoming a cohesive unit, right? Like making sure that they're all thinking on the same page, making sure that they're understanding that, each other and feeling, getting a feel for each other versus like feeling like they have to play better than the guy behind them, right? So to me, I think that's going to make this offense even better. Obviously, having the talent behind the offensive line, whether that's Purdy, Trey Lance, but it's also Christian McCaffrey. I think that makes an offensive line better as well. So overall, I think that it's going to be good. Now, as far as I think your second question is, what does this mean for the offseason and the money that they have moving
Right.
forward? I mean, I think I don't know how much, like, as far as the money, but I do know next year I would be shocked if their first round draft pick isn't a left tackle. Like, I think that regardless of how good this offensive line is, you have to have a solution for Trent Williams, because either this year or possibly next year is probably going to be, he's going to leave in the next 2 or 3 years maximum, right? If he plays 3 years, that would be a shock. I personally believe if the 49ers win a Super Bowl, I think Trent Williams retires. So they have to
Ah,
have a solution for left tackle, which they don't have on the roster right now. So I think that's going to be where the focus is next season, is finding Trent Williams' replacement, whether they need that right away or groom him for a year. But Trent is more likely not going to be here 3 years from now than he is.
and one thing I'll say is next year, that class is a good left tackle class. So the 49ers are in good hands. Next year, there are a solid amount of left tackles that I think are first round talents. Obviously, we'll have to wait a whole
And they
year to
finally have
see.
a first round pick.
And you got a first round pick. So we'll have to wait and see. But I don't think that that's a bad take. Well, that's what Williams was looking for. Could end up retiring. And I mean, he comes back for this last year. And I think if you look at the cap hit, if you designate him as a post June 1st cut next year, or not he won't be a cut obviously, but if you designate him post June 1st, I think that the 49ers don't lose too much. I think like it'll be around, maybe he split it like 7 million, 8 million, or it's either seven. I think it's 7 million about that that you end up losing in dead cap money because you can spread it out. And so yeah, that would be a tough loss for the 49ers. The one thing is it does clear up some cap space at a time where they're going to, like 49ers throwback says, have to make some tough decisions. I've spoken about that. But real quick on McKivitz itself, I think that it's a good thing that the 49ers are giving a vote of confidence in McKivitz right now. Understanding, I mean, there is no competition to McKivitz. I know the 49ers said that they have an open competition. I don't think there's a single guy on the roster right now that'll be able to compete at right tackle. Uh, like who is it? Jalen Moore. I don't think he's a tackle. Still don't. I think he's a cut candidate now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know Leroy
No.
Watson. He was a guy who was a developmental guy at UDFA, but I'm pretty sure he's working on the left side, not the right side. The second team right tackle is Matt Pryor, who was not good in Indianapolis last year. I don't even think I think there's a chance he doesn't make the roster either, although I haven't seen his contract with the guarantees. The one thing that I could question is the 49ers potentially signing a tackle at the end or near training camp that could compete with McKivitz. But right now, I think they prefer the continuity. They prefer having some familiarity, and that's what McKivitz brings. Understanding they also haven't required elite right tackle play over the last couple of years to have sustainable success. You know that you've played with Tom Compton, wasn't that good. You've played with McGlinchey, he was better than Tom Compton for sure, but still. He's still, even if you consider him a top 10 right tackle, which I think he still falls in the category because of how weak the position is, he's still not that great, right? And so I think they've been able to go alongside it. McKivitz seems like a 1 year option. Even if he's a 2 year option, he could be a backup next year with the way his contract is structured, but it seems like he's a 1 year option. And so, yeah, they're placing a vote of confidence in him. The other guy, you mentioned him briefly, Spencer Burford. Here's what our guy Chris Forster had to say about Spencer Burford this earlier today. He talked about Burford. You don't have to look over your shoulder anymore. It's your job, essentially solidifying Spencer Burford that position. And I mean, it was pretty evident that he'd get the job after Daniel Brunskill left. There's no timeshare anymore. Burford's going to be that right guard. How do you feel about year two, Burford, him coming into the role, him being a little more developed after an up and down year one, but still flashed for sure?
Yeah, this was kind of, I think, a little more interesting to me because they brought in Feliciano, right? And I think there was an interview that Feliciano did that he said that he didn't come here to be a backup. He was looking to be a starter. And if he was going to start, it was going to be at that right guard position, battling with Spencer Burford. So for Forrester to come out and already kind of say it's Burford's job, I think is a little bit interesting because, Feliciano's a guy who's played in this league a long time. And the fact that they feel Burford is going to be better for them is great. And once again, I think it moves forward with the continuity, bringing back all of the starters from that last year's offensive line. I think that, if Burford is on that same timeline as Aaron Banks, we could see him really take that next leap, and build that consistency through his game. He obviously has a lot of physical traits that you'd like to see at the right guard position. It's about consistency at this point, right? He has to be able to win on every down and not have those mental lapses that he had sometimes last season. And obviously, I think, when you have a guy like Brunskill that's coming in and taking half of your reps, it could be tough to build that. So this year he has the full off season as the number one right guard, and he knows he's going into the season without having to do that rotation. So I think, I expect him to take a big leap. I think that the 49ers offensive line development is underrated. I think
I
Kosar gets
agree.
a lot
Yeah.
of credit for how he's able to develop the defensive line. But if you look at the offensive line development, these guys are coming out and it's not as flashy of a position. You don't have like these stats as far as like sacks and pressures and all this type of stuff. So it's really hard to quantify how good your offensive line is. But the 49ers have had a solid offensive line for years and years and years. And it's been without true superstars outside of the left tackle position. So for me, that shows a lot about the development and what Forrester and the coaching staff is able to do as far as developing these guys. So I don't expect anything to change from that.
And you and I are thinking exactly the same way. The number one takeaway that I had when Burford, when Forster said it was Burford's job is, what is up with John Feliciano then? Because, like you said, I think he came into camp understanding that he'd be able to compete. Right guard was the only spot really that he was going to fit in that had a potential shot at a competition. That's out of the way. We heard last week Feliciano was practicing. He was the second team right guard. I think it was the Kel left guard, Feliciano at right guard. Forget exactly who, or sorry, the Kel left guard, Feliciano right guard. I don't exactly remember who was the center with the second team last week. It might have been Jason Poe. But I think this creates an intriguing battle for sure. Feliciano's contract was fully guaranteed for $2.25 million. You've got Nick Sakel, who the team was trying to they're trying to see if he's their backup center this year. That's where they want him, and it was a rough go for him, according to Nick Wagner today. Struggled with snaps and exchanges, and they want Zakel working specifically in the interior spots. Worked left guard last week, was at center today. The unfortunate reality, though, sometimes with these guys, we saw it with Brunskill last year, and I've seen it myself in other training camp competitions outside. There are players who are just not suited to play center, struggle with the snapping, struggle with those exchanges. They're good interior offensive linemen, just cannot play center. And that's going to be unfortunate if Zakel has these. I'm not saying that he can't play center. I'm not saying that at all. He had some small experience, I believe, at the Senior Bowl last year. And for me, the number one thing is, how does he accumulate days of good work? Is it going to be continuing like this? Is it going to be better days? Because we saw this with Daniel Brunskill last year, where he struggled to play center, and that essentially took him out of that center competition and put him at right guard at the when the season started after he came back from his injury. But I think there's significant competition now at that on those interior spots. You've got Feliciano, you've got a guy who I just said is Nick Sakel. You've also got Jason Poe, and a guy who we've got to mention, who a lot of people are putting some hype into, is Joey Fisher, who people thought, oh, he could be a tackle. He could be one of those swing tackles. No. Chris Forster said they believe he's a guard, undrafted free agent out of Shepherd, the guy who they paid the most money to. So you've got a couple of guards there that, could make a run. What do you think about the depth and also, the positions?
Yeah, I mean, I see Harold here said, 49ers need offensive line depth, and I actually disagree with Harold. I think that the offensive line is one of the positions that I feel like they're pretty deep at, right? You just listed it. How many, I think what the 49ers usually take somewhere between 8 to 10 offensive linemen is usually what they have on their
Yeah.
roster given any year. So You just we just mentioned the 5, right? The 5 starters. And then you just mentioned 3 guys that are probably for sure going to be on the team in um, Poe, and Feliciano. So they're already at 8 right there. So if they decide to take, they probably would need another tackle. So maybe if that, I don't know exactly who that third swing tackle is going to be, right? That would be, I think, the position that's up for grabs. But I could see them only taking, nine players, I guess. Whether I hope it's not Jalen Moore, because I think Jalen Moore is terrible at tackle, but I don't know who else is on the roster as far as tackles. So, but that would be the only position, right? The swing tackle would be the only position that isn't, I guess, spoken for. But I could see them only keeping 9 offensive linemen on the roster, and then saving that extra position for the secondary, which I think they're going to need, more secondary, or I think that's where they're going to have that extra person, whether it be a corner or a safety.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, for tackle, my hot take right now, or my biggest observation, I think Leroy Watson is your swing tackle this year. I think he beats out both Matt Pryor and Jalen Moore. I'm not confident in either of those guys. And do you roll with just one tackle? Because the rest of the guys, it seems like they value as interior guys. Years past, you had Daniel Brunskill as well, but I think, yeah, right now it's Leroy Watson who's the guy who I think are the highest about. That puts you at 6 guys. I think they roll with 9, which means, you've got 3 the interior guys. And could that be Zakel, Poe, and Feliciano? Yeah. But does Joey Fisher slide in there? Is he a prime practice squad guy? We'll see. But I think that there's going to be a good competition on the interior. I think the depth is there. The only thing is, I mean, you've got a veteran in Feliciano. You know what he is. The rest of the guys, you're trying to still figure out what they are. But yeah, I think there's going to be good competition there along the offensive line. But the biggest takeaway is that front 5 right now, it seems fully solidified.
And I think that's a good sign for the 49ers, right? That's one unit that, obviously you would like the quarterback situation to be well defined as well. But, if the offensive line was question mark and the quarterback was a question mark, you'd be really it'd be really tough right now. But the fact that, the offensive line is solidified at this point, they're, even a step further than they were from last season.
Yeah, I agree. Last topic of the day, though. Got to talk to you about some standouts. Number 1, Drake Jackson, up 13 pounds, spoke today, seemed bigger. Seems like, he spoke a little bit, was very candid about the struggles, had to do with his size, obviously the duration of the season last year, at the end of the year where he was essentially phased out, inactive in the rotation. Right now, seems like a big vote of confidence in him. No signings elsewhere. We've talked a little bit about Jackson in the past. Now it seems like, he's bigger, he's got the size, and he's got the opportunity. How do we feel about him so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of tough. Obviously, he's put in the work, right? So the things that he could control, he's controlling. I think Wilkes in his presser a few weeks ago mentioned that Drake Jansen spent the whole offseason at the 49ers practice facilities and really focused on getting stronger. Drake Jackson has a lot of raw potential, but for him to really take that next leap, he has to learn how to be more than just a speed rusher, right? He has to be able to beat players one-on-one. And I think that 4th offensive lineman or defensive lineman, Rohan is one of the most important positions that I think is going to be, because this 49ers defensive line has 3 bona fide guys, right? With Armstead, Ridgeway, my mind's blanking. Bosa, and then who's the guy they just signed from the Eagles?
Hargrave.
Hargrave, there, sorry. So those 3 guys obviously are bona fide 3-down players, right?
Yeah.
They're, at least 2 of those guys are probably going to see double teams pretty often in Bosa and Ridgeway. But so whomever's that fourth guy is going to be getting a lot of one-on-one opportunities, and they have to win. You know what I mean? And Drake Jackson isn't proven, so this year he really has to take that leap and be able to do that. Or, uh, if I'm the 49ers, I'm wondering why Yannick isn't on this team. Like, he's just sitting there. Like, what are we like? To me, that is somebody who is attainable. They have the money to get him. I don't understand why he's not on this team right now, Rohan. And the only reason could be that they feel like they have that answer already on the roster. And obviously, the main opportunity, or the main person that they expect to get into that role is Drake Jackson. So maybe they believe he's the guy.
Yeah, I mean, to me, on the Yannick thing, here's what I think. I think it's honestly more the players, because obviously you're trying to get the best deal, and I think it's a multi-year deal. I think the multi-year deal thing is really the biggest indicator, and maybe he waits for a like a big injury to occur in the offseason where his services are going to be uh, needed much more, and I think that might that might get him a little more money, and so I'm not too concerned there. I think the 49ers have the option to sign whoever they want in free agency at training camp time. I don't think it happens before then. I think it happens, once they have an understanding after mandatory minicamp of how their roster will look, maybe even a little into training camp. As for Drake, I mean, good signs, all good signs. We uh, liked what I heard today from him. He talked about, I mean, we've heard how he's been here the entire time after the end of the season, working out, getting bigger. Obviously, there are results both in his workout regimen and in his size. And he talked about how, him being him essentially wearing out at the end of the year, and that kind of led to this transformation. Good sign. Got to see it now on the field, but a good sign for Drake. Last standout of the day, though, got to talk about Jair Brown. I think it was Brandon Ayuk who revealed Jair Brown already has 4 interceptions at OTAs. 49ers changed their philosophy last year. They were a huge turnover team last year. Hasn't been their MO on defense in years past. You're adding a guy who has made a couple of plays now. I mean, we saw the playmaking last offseason in training camp. There was a significant amount of interceptions. You're seeing the change in OTAs. How promising is that from Jair Brown, understanding he was a playmaker in college as well?
Huge. I mean, Ayuk, I think, is also mentioned that he's locker room like neighbors. They're like sharing the locker room right next to each other as well, which I think is great. I think Brandon Ayuk is, in his interviews or his presser, is seeming like a guy who could definitely be a vocal leader on this team. He's locked in and very confident in what he's gonna do this season. But as far as Brown, I think it's great, and I think he's in a great situation because Gibson also is a disruptor on the deep as a safety, and so there isn't this pressure that Brown has to be ready and to start right away. Right, he has time to really develop, but now you look at that combination of Hufunga, who is a natural born disruptor, just figures out a way to be around the ball, whether it be through interceptions or fumbles. You had Gibson, who had a few interceptions last season, and now you're bringing in a guy like Brown, who's able to do that as well. Not to mention Mooney Ward, Diamador Lenore, Luther, Womack. So the secondary now is full of not only guys that are, you know, not only guys that are guys that have a knack for finding the ball, right? And making plays. And I think that paired with how good this defensive line has consistently been bodes well. I mean, the 49ers were the top team when it came to turnover differential. They were, top three in total turnovers, as far as turnovers that they were able to make. So I think that they're gonna be even better at that with bringing in this young talent that could pick up where the last guys left off.
I agree, and I mean, I think for me, it's a good sign. It's nothing but good because The biggest question is how quickly can Jair Brown get on the field? And right now, it's seeing sooner than later if he can play make. The 49ers want playmakers on that defense. And I think Steve Wilkes, especially with his aggressive mindset, is looking for playmakers. And so to me, that's what I'm looking that I mean, it's a great sign to see even more of an influx of turnovers being created after what we saw last year, which was a significant change from years past. Hopefully, Jair Brown gets on the field a good amount with those three safety sets, but it's a good sign for the 49ers because they might have found themselves a mini Hufanga in a way. Similar testing, similar ball skills. We'll see how it ends up going, though, this season.
And the 49ers best duo had been Tart and
Jimmy
Jimmy
Ward.
Ward,
Yeah,
right? And one of the reasons why those guys were so good together was they're extremely interchangeable,
right.
right? They could switch and they could pretty much be wherever they needed to be, type of thing. If Hufunga and Brown could turn into that type of duo where they could switch and kind of, go wherever they need to go, type of thing, and still be able to produce, 49ers secondary is going to be nice for a very long time,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So that's going to be exciting to really see that development of those guys. And Steve Wilkes is known for his ability to develop secondary, so it's perfect timing to have this type of young talent back there.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's exactly what it is. Like Steve Wilkes is here. It's the perfect way to develop him, and especially because he was a Steve Wilkes guy going into the draft. So that's a great sign. And I mean, good to hear. With this rookie class, it was really interesting to see, first of all, who's going to hit the field early, but also how impactful can they be to the 49ers' chase for a Super Bowl? Because you're trying to balance the two timelines, right? Drafting talent for the future to essentially replace players when they leave in free agency, but also win the Super Bowl. And so it's good to hear immediate contributions from the top player they drafted.
Yeah, and to get him in the third round is even more exciting, right?
Exactly. But man, it's been a great show. We talked about the quarterbacks, talked about John Lynch's comments, Brock Purdy, expectations for them, focused on the offensive line, heard a lot from Chris Forster today. Any last thoughts before we head on out of here, Sunil?
Yeah, I actually had a question for you. This is something that Jesse
Go
brought
for
up
it.
to me, and I wanted to get if you kind of understood, if you knew a little bit more about this. So I'm sure you know about the Jimmy G stuff that's happening
Yeah.
in with the Raiders right now. There's a possibility if he doesn't pass his physical that they're able to cut him without having to pay him. Does that mean that the 49ers would lose their compensatory pick?
And this is a big question. I've actually had a huge conversation with some of my guys with the 49ers web zone group. And it's interesting because obviously right now he factors in if he eliminates it though, um, the biggest thing is that if it takes into account snaps and postseason awards, I think that he won't be factored. But if it only takes into account salary, which is already part of the contract, I think that um, he still would be a compensatory free agent. Jason Hurley Jason Hurley, he runs a 49ers site for the cap. He says that we still would, but there's a good amount of information saying that it obviously wouldn't be there, and a couple of other people that have chimed in on this have said no, he would not count, or he would essentially not be a compensatory free agent, which essentially means the 49ers have Javon Hargrave and Mike McGlinchey canceling out, and the 49ers lose one of their third round compensatory picks. At the moment, I'm not exactly sure because I've heard from both sides two different things. David Lombardi, it says here, says yes. Not exactly sure. This is something I'm looking to clarify and something we'll talk about on our next show, though. At the moment, I'm leaning towards no. I don't think that he would be eliminated, but I have to get some more information on that.
Cool. Stay
Yeah.
tuned. Next
Yeah,
time
man.
we'll have the answer, possibly.
Exactly. So, everybody in the chat, make sure you guys stay tuned. But talking about the chat, thank you guys as always for tuning in. It's always a pleasure answering questions, interacting with you guys. We're going to be back live soon. I might be live tomorrow. I know Neil's got a show coming up. Oh, you got any shows coming up, Sunil?
Nah, I think this is going to be my last one for the week. But yeah, stay tuned. Next week should be on Tuesday with Jesse again, and then probably another one with you next week sometime.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. So, guys, stay tuned with the content. We're going to be back soon. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll see you guys next time.